So, when I got underway, I decided, you know what, maybe it's not meant to be. If it's meant to be, it'll happen someday. And then I kept it pushing. I finished my NYSC and I moved on with my life. So I got a job in the airline industry. I did that for a couple years. But while I was in that airline, every single month, I don't want to exaggerate and be like every single week, but then I was still consistently applying for a job in that federal ministry. I kept doing it over and over and over, like sending out applications just to get a job in the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I even remember back in the day, whenever I met a passenger of mine that I knew that worked in any federal ministry, I'll be like, hey, if you guys are hiring, please let me know so I can send in my application. And they're like, well, it's gonna get announced, you get something. I pleaded my case to a lot of people, friends, family. I It's so interesting now that I think about it, like how God works, right? Because even back then I had a family member who had the opportunity to give me a referral to work in that place. She had the contact, right? And I remembered reaching out to her, telling her how much I wanted to work in this place. And she was like, oh, that's sweet. Okay, don't worry. If I hear anything, I'll let you know. And then guess what? There was someone else who was her friend's distant cousin or something, who also studied the same course that I studied. And the girl was also looking for a job, right? She was also looking for a job. And so she came from the UK back to Nigeria after her master's degree. And so she talked to this lady about getting her a job in that particular industry. And then guess what? They literally gave her that job in that same ministry that I kept pushing and praying and begging them for. They give the opportunity to someone else. I was shocked, I was sad. So I asked my relative. So I said, I've been really begging, like really begging you to help me with this job, and I never heard anything back about it. Can you let me know what I'm doing wrong, or is there something wrong with my resume? Like, is there anything that I need to change, do better? And my relative said, oh, have you seen this person's resume? So I said no. And they told me, if you look at this girl's resume, you would also want to give them the job in that industry. So I said, what is it about this resume? So I found the resume at some point. I got a hold of it and I read through it. And guess what? It was the exact same experience that I had, that this person had. But the only difference was that they had studied abroad for their master's degree and I hadn't. So that gave them an edge, I guess. And so at that point I was like, okay. So now, because this person went abroad, they're better than us that studied back home. That's sad. So at that point I just told myself, you know what, I'm done applying for this thing. Or for now, my new focus will be leaving this country to also go get my master's degree abroad. And so that was how my journey started. And I decided to abandon that particular focus as of that time. And I decided, let me go get myself a master's degree and come back and see if I can get a job in that ministry. Like I said, I was like desperately trying to get a job in that ministry. So I left the country and I decided to travel to the United States to get a master's. And so when it was time for me to choose the course of study, I looked inward, I looked at my background, you know, like I said, I studied international studies. So I was like, okay, what can I do that's still in this line? And so I decided to focus on negotiations and conflict management because it seemed like it would be helpful given that there was a lot of terrorism and insecurity back then before I left the country. And I'm like, okay, that's a major that will be useful, that I can, you know, use positively to impact the community at some point. So I was like, okay, let me focus on that. You know, global security seemed like something that would, you know, that would be interesting. Like I said, my strength when I was in school was in um, foreign policy and diplomacy and all of that. So I was like, okay, let me do this. I think I might enjoy it. And anyway, so that was how I traveled for my master's. So I graduated, and so at that point, my dilemma was now, okay, should I go back to Nigeria to still try to push for this foreign affairs job, or should I just focus on gaining more experience in the United States? So when I did a little bit of research and I asked people, that at that point I already started growing my network of friends and people that knew a little bit more about that Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I found out after doing my research that they don't even pay those people well. So basically the building looked nice, everything looked cool. You only get like stipends and allowances maybe when you travel out of the country, and then sometimes they have to pull a string or two to even be sent out on assignments and all of that. But they were paying them like basic federal ministry salary. And when I calculated it, now not to shit on anybody's hustle, not to be disrespectful to people that work in that ministry, but when I looked at it and then I calculated it against what people earned in dollars in America, I'm like, yo, I'm sorry, I don't want to go back there. And it wasn't just about the money, but it was also, I wasn't sure I was gonna get that job, right? So if I end up giving up getting more experience in America, better pay for that uncertainty, is it worth it? And then if I end up getting it, right? And how am I sure, you know, the internal politics wouldn't even stifle my growth within the ministry? Because again, there are so many subtle biases that play out, you know, working in federal ministries in Nigeria, like based off of what I heard after doing my research. And I'm like, yeah, maybe it's not your time. And at that point, the economy of the country was not in its best shape as well. So it wasn't even the right time for me to start thinking of going back. And so I just abandoned ship, to be honest. I was like, I'm not even doing it again. So I left that alone. And now it was time for me to forge ahead.